I think one of the most important questions to ask yourself as a founder is whether you're on trend or off trend. And it makes a tremendous difference to your fundraising process. The larger the rounds get, the more you want to run it a really tight process. With this fundraise, different from any raise I've done before, we really ran it a tight ship. We went out and we talked to 70 to 100 investors in 2 weeks. We got our raise done in 3 to 4 weeks total. The only thing that gets a VC to pull the trigger is the belief that they won't have an opportunity to invest in 3 months or 6 months. I think what you can do to help yourself as a founder is by running a tight process, you create an environment where the question to the VC is not pull the trigger or wait. The question is pull the trigger or miss because someone else is going to get the deal done. Fundraising is a necessary evil. In my ideal world, I would own 100% of the largest company in the world, not have to take any investment to get. It's very hard to do that.
Okay, here we go. So welcome to another episode of Tenfold Global. Today, I'm excited to sit down with Tyler Maloney, CEO of TeachMe.To, a company that is transforming how people learn new skills from sports to music. So TeachMe has grown 10x in the past year alone, now delivering hundreds of lessons daily across more than 100 US cities. So backed by $5 million in seed funding from investors like Sam Altman and Bling Capital. Yeah, Tyler, did I miss anything?
No, it sounds about right. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So you've achieved like some impressive numbers, like 10x growth, hundreds of lessons daily, raising $5 million in seed round. So it's clear you've built some significant momentum, right? Could you maybe share some additional key metrics or KPIs you're comfortable discussing, like things like revenue, maybe growth, active users, whatever?
Yeah, those are kind of the key ones we look at. We look at a bunch of different stuff. Demand side retention, how many students have a good enough experience that they're purchasing. Again, that's a very big metric. Supply side retention, how many coaches come on the platform, stick with us. The cohorts from a year ago that we acquired on the coach side, are they still teaching today? Are they still getting students? Retention is one of the biggest on both sides that we look at. And then absolute growth, GMV, revenue, lessons per day are kind of the main core metrics that we look at.
That's awesome. And speaking about your fundraising journey, right? So it's also impressive, right? You have secured over $25 million across all your ventures, right? Including the recent one with $5 million in the seed round. So how did you approach to fundraising for TeachMe differ from your previous experiences? What was different this time? Let's start with that.
Yeah, each fundraising journey, 3 companies, about 8 rounds, if you really count the early stuff and the pre-seed stuff too. Each one's different. It depends on the company. It depends on the market. I think one of the most important questions to ask yourself as a founder is whether you're on trend or off trend. And it makes a tremendous difference to your fundraising process. And I want to kind of share why. I think if you're on trend, so for instance, if you're building AI today, there are very few mature comps. No one knows what the best AI businesses looked like in the early days, nor what the bad businesses look like in the early days. And there's a ton of hope. There's a lot of belief and almost no baseline metrics to compare to. So you can raise on an idea and excitement and FOMO if you're on trend. If you're off trend, for instance, if you're building a marketplace like we are in 2024, there are a lot of mature comps. Marketplaces, meaning Uber for X, Airbnb for Y. They were on trend 15 years ago, and those companies have matured. And we have data on what worked and what didn't work. And a lot of the investors in those marketplace businesses that didn't become Uber, they got burned, right? So you've got some scars on the investor side, which means that you'll be met with skepticism when you go to market. So I think if you're on trend, you can kind of raise an idea. If you're off trend, you're going to get a lot of questions much earlier in the business about key metrics. They're going to want to see that your early metrics look more like Uber and less like, WAG, for instance. And it makes it much harder to raise. So all that to say, if you're a founder out there, if you're building the thing that's on trend, the story you have to put together, the information that you need in your pitch deck and data room is very different if you're building something that's off trend.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this specifics of fundraising in the marketplace niche, right, in a sec. But before that, can you tell me what are the maybe 3 things you did during this fundraising round that you hadn't known or done in your early rounds with other companies?
This was the tightest. I don't know that I have 3 things. I definitely have 1. This was the tightest process that we've run. So the smaller the dollar amount, the more you can kind of opportunistically go to angels and take a check here and then have another conversation, take a check here, and you kind of build it up. The larger the rounds get, the more you want to run it like a really tight process. And so with this fundraise, different from any raise I've done before, we really ran a tight ship. We went out and we talked to 70 to 100 investors in 2 weeks. We got our raise done in 3 to 4 weeks total. It was a very, very intense 3 to 4 weeks, but we really talked to everybody at the exact same time. And there was a reason for that that I could talk about if you're interested.
Yeah, sure. Let's go there.
I think what you have to understand is that, especially if you are, not even on off trend, a VC, when you initially talk to them, is thinking, do I invest in this business or do I wait and see what happens next? And a rational investor the answer is always going to be wait and see what happens next, right? I'd rather have more data than less data to make this decision. So have a conversation, start tracking the company, see how they're doing in 3 months, see how they're doing in 6 months. The only thing that gets a VC to pull the trigger is the belief that they won't have an opportunity to invest in 3 months or 6 months. So I think what you can do to help yourself as a founder, and what we really did a good job of here, is by running a tight process, you create an environment where the question to the VC is not pull the trigger or wait. The question is pull the trigger or miss, because someone else is going to get the deal done. So this is the first time, I've talked about doing this before. This is the first time that we've really run an investment process this tight. And I think it helped us get a good deal done faster than anything I've done before.
And you touched this, but still, marketplace models, though, can be tricky when it comes to fundraising, right? Especially balancing the supply and demand side as you scale, and so on and so on. So from your perspective, what are some of the specific challenges marketplace founders usually face when raising capital, and maybe raising capital in 2024?
I think you're starting with a backdrop of a skeptical investment community. You have a lot of people that raised a bunch of money, deployed a lot of capital in the early 2020s. A lot of it went into crypto. A lot of it went to zero. And so the VCs are getting pressures from their LPs to make sure they're a little more diligent about who they write checks into. So you're starting from a backdrop of it's just kind of a hard time to raise. And then kind of like I said, with marketplaces, there is a lot of comps, right? And people have invested in Uber for X. Almost every firm you talk to has written a check into the Uber for X that hasn't worked out. And so they're looking back at, VCs are pattern matchers, right? They're looking back at, hey, we thought this would be great. You kind of look like this business. It turned out not great. So we think you're going to turn out not great. And what a lot of investors want to see is early metrics that line up to the 2 or 3 examples of marketplaces that went really big. I'm not even talking about Thumbtack and Upwork, right? Those are considered failures by a lot of people in the venture community, right? It's Uber, Airbnb. And so I think that's one of the challenges. And I think it's actually a failure mode for investors too, is what worked for Uber isn't necessarily what's going to work for TeachMe.To. Our metrics, our AOV is different. Our retention is going to look different. It's a different business. If you're trying to overfit the pattern recognition to that, you can actually miss out on some great companies. But that's the backdrop in which you're going into investors, right? Is you got to persuade one person who has already been burned by this business model, And then you have to get them enough data to help them persuade the other 5 people in their firm who have already been burned by investments into this business model. It's just an uphill battle, right? It can be done. We raised capital, but we have a lot of traction, and it was frankly, I've raised more on less traction than this. It was a very hard fundraise, I think, because of the current market circumstances and because we were off trend.
But still, you have secured investment from Sam Altman, right? Who is one of the most influential figures like in the tech industry today. That's a remarkable feat. So can you share the story behind how you connected with him and secured this investment for TeachMe?
Yeah.
What was the experience like?
It was really cool. He's a very down to earth, approachable person for someone of his magnitude and level. And I feel really fortunate because I got to know him about 2-3 months before ChatGPT launched. So, we got to know each other, do dinners at his house every few months or so over kind of that 2-year period when I was living in San Francisco and he was going through this, and got a little bit of a glimpse into just the rise of OpenAI and ChatGPT. And obviously, before all that, right, he'd run YC and founded OpenAI. He was a big figure in the tech community, but he didn't have the profile that he has today. So yeah, I just kind of randomly ended up at a dinner with him, was seated next to him. It turns out that we went to the same tiny middle school in St. Louis, Missouri, which is kind of the middle of nowhere. We were 10 years apart, so we didn't know each other or anything, but we initially connected on just, our old chemistry teacher and our old math teacher, and then became friends. And, he's seen a lot of really successful marketplaces come through Y Combinator, and we're fortunate to have him as an investor.
Yeah, that's awesome. And speaking about relationship, right? So what is your approach to building and maintaining this relationship with investors, even maybe before and even after the deal is done? Do you have any kind of practical tips for founders, anything like that?
Yeah, I think that's something that I've grown a lot in over the last 10 years. I think I initially, as a young 22-year-old, my first company, was a bit insecure. You wanted to present, you get these investors who have done amazing things and you're just a kid, right? And so you want to kind of present this perfect image of what's going on, and you treat them almost like they're your boss and they tell you what to do and you go to them. As you spend more time building startups, you start to realize that there are patterns, there are better and worse ways to approach things, but no one has the crystal ball and the formula for how to build $1 billion company, right? And you in it every single day have access to so much more information and data of what's going on than someone who's on your board or wrote a check or talks to you once a month. And so the way I approach investor relationships has changed a lot, right? I've changed from seeing them as my boss to seeing them as a advisor and someone who should be asking questions, giving insights based on things they've seen somewhere else. But ultimately, my job as a founder is to make the final call on everything. And a lot of my job as preemptively helping set expectations. I think that's another mistake a lot of founders make, is just sharing good information, not sharing bad information. We tried very hard to have or just not sharing information when there's not good, right? A lot of founders kind of go radio silent when they don't have something great to share. We're pretty diligent about, with our core investors meeting every single month, with all of our shareholders, sending out a Loom update every 3 months. What's going well? What's not going well? What our goals are for the next quarter? What were our goals last quarter and what happened? Did we hit some of them? Did we miss them? Did we change them? Why? And so just keeping a very clear communication channel and narrative alive. The worst thing for an investor is hearing, hey, this company's great. And then you hear nothing. And then suddenly there's really bad news. And they're like, how the heck did we get from place A to place B? So you have to bring them along for the journey so they understand what's going on. And I think that's, again, just sharing bad information, having those difficult conversations, like one of the hardest but most valuable things you can do to build trust with investors.
Yeah, and if we go back to this initial stage when you have to pitch those like investors, right? So what recommendations would you give to other founders on crafting a pitch that stands out to this high profile investors like Sam Altman?
Yeah, I think starting with the problem. One failure mode I see a lot of founders do is they come in and say, "Hey, I'm building the X for Y for the," and you're like, "Who cares?" Right? You have to start with really identifying the problem. Who has this problem? What is the problem? Why does it matter? If you can get there and your audience is like, yeah, this makes sense to me. Like that's a big issue. And I know that's a big issue. And that does sound painful. You're halfway there, right? Now you've created the need for your solution. And hey, this is how we're doing it. This is how we're doing it differently. But a lot of people skip that step. And if you miss that, it doesn't matter your market size, your traction, like, you don't have their heart, you don't have their emotion, actually intuitively feeling like they care about this thing or that it matters. So I think starting with the problem and spending a lot of time really making sure you fully understand and can articulate that in a way that it hits and it lands on people. I kind of think about pitching as two phases. There's problem solution, where you need to win their hearts, where they're fundamentally going to be like, this is a big thing that matters. This is a clever way to approach it. Like, okay, I get it. And then everything after that is kind of a checkbox, right? It's like, okay, is the market big enough? Check. What's the competition like? Check. Has someone else tried this before? How is this different? Check. But if you don't get that first part right, where you kind of get their heart on board, none of the mental checklist pieces actually matter. And people forget that, right? They think, hey, I've got 10 slides. I should focus my time evenly. If you don't get those first 2-ish slides right, it's over before it's even started.
Yeah, that's so true. And so a lot of marketplace founders often struggle with the timing of fundraising. So how do you know when you're ready for a round, like for your seed round, for example, right? Either key milestone or metric you think is important before going out to raise your seed round as a marketplace?
Yeah, I think of fundraising as a necessary evil. In my ideal world, I would own 100% of the largest company in the world and not have to take any investment to get there, right? It's very hard to do that. So you raise capital because you have to. So first thing is get as much traction as you can on as few dollars as possible, right? Second thing is when you start realizing, hey, there's an end to the road here. I can't get any further without more capital, right? You need to be able to identify that 6 to 12 months in advance. And then you need to understand, if I'm going to go raise capital, it's different, pre-seed, seed, A, very different levels, right? But if I'm going to go raise capital, what questions am I going to need to be able to answer? What evidence am I going to need to have to support that we've made enough progress to warrant someone putting a check into this company, right? And then you got to make sure you give yourself enough time to actually address that. So, generally I would say raise as little as possible, be really efficient with spending. Don't hire because you have money, right? Like hire as few people as you possibly can. Push that runway as long as you can. But when you realize you're getting, 12 to 18 months out, you better know, and you better be working on, you better know that you're going to run out of cash, that you need to raise funding, and what 2 or 3 things are really going to matter so that you can spend the time that you have getting those metrics where they need to be. And then you should go fundraise at least 6 months in advance, right? So that's you're going to run out of money. You need to fundraise 6 months in advance. So you need to know 6 to 12 months more so that you can get the metrics where they need to be to raise.
And speaking about hiring, as far as I understand, you have a very distributed team with engineers based in Brazil, teammates in Philippines, right? Some guys in Canada, and of course, your core team is based in the US, right? So, from an investment and business perspective, do you see having such an international team as this competitive advantage, or did it present any kind of challenges when you were raising your initial fund, for example?
Yes and yes. I mean, again, VCs are pattern matching, right? So I think the world's changed, and I think distributed teams can have a really significant advantage if you build them right, because you can get great talent much more affordable. You can find hungry people, but there's a subset of venture investors that believe you have to build in person, you have to build in the Valley, you have to build with people that have a Stanford and a Facebook and a Google resume, and so you're bringing a new objection into the relationship, right? Like they are going to have questions already about your business model, and now suddenly they have questions about your talent strategy. So it does create, for some investors, a headwind. I also think it creates a competitive advantage, right? We are able to find hungrier, more talented people for lower cost because we're going to places where there is not as much opportunity as there is in the Valley. And frankly, my experience, it depends on what you're hiring for. If I was Sam building OpenAI and I needed the top 10 AI researchers in the world, there's only 10 of those people. You're going to have to pay them whatever they want. They're probably going to be coming out of Stanford and these MIT, right? Like, so that's, if you're building that company, you need that talent strategy. For what we're doing, like, we're taking on more market risk than we are technical risk, right? We're not trying to invent artificial, AGI, right? We're trying to build a website that isn't that dissimilar from Airbnb or Uber. And the skill sets that we have are more commoditized, right? You need really good engineers, but there's a lot of people that can write the type of code that we want, right? So for our type of business, I look for traits that are more like, again, hunger, work ethic. They need to be really good coders, but you don't have to be the only person that knows something in the world. Yeah. And so for us, we're able to find that. And, a lot of it is an appreciation of the capabilities of this talent. We believe that our team in Brazil is as good, if not better, than a lot of American coders.
Okay.
And as a result, we give them really interesting work, and they've returned that trust by being phenomenal, right? They're also super loyal to us because everybody else that goes to Brazil does it for outsourcing. They give them really boring work. They try to say, hey, we build all the interesting stuff in the US, and then we come here and outsource it to you. So you just maintain the code and we'll pay you whatever. So we're able to pay them more than those companies, give them more interesting work, treat them with respect and trust. And as a result, we have a better engineering team at a lower cost than many of the competitors we play. So I do view it as a competitive advantage. There's a lot of things you have to do around remote culture to make that work. There are things you have to do around hiring strategy to make that work. But I think it's a huge advantage for us.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today. We've touched on some incredibly valuable, in practical tips for founders, for marketplace founders. So yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.